Ah! Hey, I can't help it. I'm just so happy. Now I do have my good days and my bad days, but they come far and in between. Um, I want to give thanks to the Most High, to the One, to the Source, to the All, Universal Creator, Hashem, Hashima, uh, Yahshua. Thanks to Noble Drew Ali. Thanks to Dr. Yafa Bey. Thanks to the 13th Messenger, Taj Tariq Bey. Um, Thanks to all the other messengers and everybody that came before me. Uh, I mean, I do have a message. I might not be a messenger, but I do have a message, and it's my own message, and it is what it is. But I will send a shout out to that mama baby, not baby mama, but mama baby. Send a shout out to that mama baby. You know what I mean? That's a little code right there. Might not be able to break it, but somebody will. But anyway, today we're not going to talk too much about anything. I mean, well, just a little short story for you. Story time. It's a little short story for you. We got the book for thy ferret. Book for thy ferret and weasel parable. So it's called the book for thy ferret and weasel. Ferret and weasel. And it's just a little parable. And it's from the book of books. Okay? So I'm gonna read a little bit from that for you. Give you a little story time, alright? Let me jump right on into it. And this is like a little, it's got duality in it, a lot of duality in it, and it's also got some humor in it. It's just basically some creativity, and I can't really take too much credit for it because it's something I got after I came out of meditation. It's just a story that came to me when I was, I didn't think I was meditating. I think I was just, it was in between meditation and sleep, or that meditation is just to get you somewhere else. Meditation is not the end all be all. Meditation is just to get you somewhere else to where when you do go to sleep that you're able to commune with your ancestors. And I was in between sleep and in between another realm or whatever it was, and this is just a story that happened to, and I pieced it together, but this is basically the best that I could get out of it, of whatever I can remember of it. And it was just a vision that was gifted into me from part of my message. But anyway, so it does have some duality in it, and it does have some humor in it. So not maybe everybody's not going to be able to get this, but don't take it all into a literal sense. Just try to get what you can get out of it. And if there's anything inside of this that can help you, then you use it. If it doesn't help you, then it doesn't help you. Bah! All right. Book for thy ferret and weasel parable. Part 1. Once upon a time in a land not too far from here lived a beautiful and arrogant ferret. We will call this ferret Mr. Freemore. Mr. Freemore was but a pet, a slave, free-range slave if you will. Mr. Freemore had a master. He was a teenage boy who just celebrated his 13th solar return. For his 13th solar return day, his gods, i.e. parents, gave him a pet ferret which he named Mr. Freemore. Mr. Freemore had a reasonable yet mediocre existence, for he was let loose in the house from time to time, but as it was, Mr. Freemore was but a pet, a free-range slave, who was kept in his 3D box most of his life. One day, Mr. Freemore's master had him fitted for a harness so that he may take his pet on long walks in the beautiful country. This made Mr. Freemore very happy, for he longed to see what it was outside this world. For Mr. Freemore had only known the inside of a 3D box, and knew not what laid ahead an outer world. As the 13-year-old boy put the harness on his pet ferret, Mr. Freemore was extremely excited, for Mr. Freemore only got glimpses of the outside world from his 3D box. Once the 13-year-old boy fitted Mr. Freemore with the harness, the boy and the pet began their walk. It was a beautiful hot sunny day on a nature trail which the boy took his pet for a walk. Mr. Freemore was so happy. He felt so free and so alive. It was everything he hoped for and so much more. Yet they had only walked 9 steps. After the 9th step, the 13-year-old boy tied his ferret to a tree. for there was a small pond, and the boy wished to skip stones across the pond's smooth, enticing surface. So while the boy skipped stones, Mr. Freemore tried to keep walking, but he couldn't, for he was bound by his leash. This absolutely infuriated Mr. Freemore. He began to pull and kick and roll. All of his kicking and twisting attracted a great horned owl. We will call this owl Mr. Owl. Mr. Owl was asleep in his den. Unknown to Mr. Freemore, he was tied to a tree that housed a great predator. Mr. Owl, truly agitated by being disturbed, peered his head out of his hollow den to see what the commotion was about. Mr. Owl saw was astonishing to him. What Mr. Owl saw was astonishing to him. He thought to himself, is today my solar return day? No, it's not my solar return day. My solar return day is 10/31/76. And this is about a beautiful summer day. Albeit too bright for Mr. Owl's taste, Mr. Owl was so confused. He saw this most scrumptious meal left at his doorstep and needed someone to thank. By this time, Mr. Freemore had stopped rolling about and was fixated on the great eyes that peered down on him. Mr. Owl saw the ferret, stuck his body out of his den, and flapped his wings as a sign of power and strength. But Mr. Freemore only stared at the great owl, and with no fear at all called out to the owl, "Good day, fine sir. I wonder if I may ask you for a favor." Mr. Owl let out a great chuckle, then replied, "You would ask of me a favor? Don't be ridiculous, dear boy." Mr. Freemore replied, "Boy? No, I am but a ferret. My master, the boy, is over there tossing stones in the water." Now Mr. Owl was starting to get pissed, because not only was he getting hungry, but this rodent had jokes, and not particularly funny ones at that. And Mr. Owl so loved a good laugh. Mr. Owl replied, "Okay, Ferret, I will grant you one question before I swoop down on thee." Mr. Freemore then spoke, "Well, I see you have those great shiny sharp talons, my dear friend, and seeing as I am stuck to this tree and long to be free, can you use your talons to rip the harness from my back so I might be free?" Mr. Owl looked at Mr. Freemore, then swooped down before him. Soon as he landed, Mr. Owl put both wings about his stomach and started laughing so hard. He promptly fell over and began to roll on the ground, much like Mr. Freemore had. Mr. Owl tried to talk again, but could not contain his laughter. Mr. Owl could not even see, for his eyes were filled with tears of joy. Now Mr. Freemore was pissed. He shouted at Mr. Owl and said, "Hey buddy, if you're not going to help me, get the hell out of here before I kick your ass." Now Mr. Owl stopped laughing and tried to keep a straight face. Then Mr. Owl said, You kick my ass?" Then burst out laughing as his great belly began to ache. Mr. Owl had not laughed this hard in all his years. Finally Mr. Owl said, "You're not from around here, are you? Where are you from? What's your nationality?" Well, Mr. Freemore said, "They tell me I'm from this pet store called Africa, and I'm a black-footed ferret, so I guess my nationality is black." No, dear boy. "I'm from Britain," the great owl said, "so my nationality is British. Black is not a nationality, it's a color, genius." By this time the boy had finished skipping stones and was coming to reclaim his pet. With the flap of his great wings, the great owl shot up to his den. He then called down to the ferret and said, "What is your name, old chap?" The ferret replied, "Mr. Freemore." Now Mr. Owl began to laugh so hard he fell back in his den and pulled a stomach muscle and injured a wing. Mr. Freemore called out to Mr. Owl to ask him his name, but Mr. Owl was laughing so hard that he could not reply. The 13-year-old boy collected his pet and went back to the house after only 9 short steps, much to the dismay of Mr. Freemore. After several weeks of walking through various nature trails, Mr. Freemore began to realize why Mr. Owl laughed at him so much. For one, after meeting a mouse named Four, he realized great horned owls eat ferrets and rodents alike. And for two, he realized he was anything but a Freemore. He was quite the opposite. Now whenever the boy stopped and tied him up to a tree, Mr. Freemore stopped trying to get free, for he now knew that ties that bonded him were much deeper than a harness. Mr. Freemore stopped trying to get free, for he now knew the ties that bonded him were much deeper than a harness. Mr. Fremore always just dug himself a hole and tried to stay out of sight. Over the last several weeks, a weasel named Scamper had been following the 13-year-old boy, and Mr. Fremore, Scamper had grown more and more jealous each day as he watched. For Scamper's life was not easy, but he had his own business and was free. Okay, let me read that again for you. Over the last several weeks, a weasel named Scamper had begun following the 13-year-old boy and Mr. Fremore. Scamper had grown more and more jealous each day as he watched. For Scamper's life was not easy, but he had his own business and was free. But Scamper was lazy. He thought to himself how much easier life would be if he was the boy's friend instead of the ferret. You see, Scamper was on the outside looking in, so he never knew Mr. Fremore was but a slave, but a pet, and not friends with the boy at all. For if they were truly friends, the boy would let Mr. Fremore go and come as he pleased, not just state to state, but continent to continent, country to country, without a leash that can be pulled back when once thy master says thy time is up. You understand that? Do you understand it? Do you understand it? The concept about being a slave? Because not just state to state, but continent to continent, country to country, without a leash, without somebody saying you got 6 months, you got a year. If you were free, you would have as much time to go wherever you wanted to. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. Mr. Owl had hurt his wings so bad that he could not travel far from his den. He could only barely hunt over the last several weeks. But Mr. Owl so missed his friend Mr. Fremore and the laughs he gave him. Mr. Owl made it up in his mind's eye that he would not eat Mr. Fremore. He was going to try his best to free his friend. Okay, I just totally messed that all up. I haven't read this in a while. Alright, Mr. Owl made it up in his mind's eye that he would not eat Mr. Fremore. He was going to try his best to free his friend. It just so happened one day, as luck would have it, well, let's not say luck, let's say divine intervention. As Scamper was following Mr. Fremore and Mr. Owl was hunting Scamper, all three met simultaneously. Mr. Fremore was tied to a tree and fast asleep in his hole. All of a sudden he heard a loud screech. And when he looked up, Scamper ran smack into him and yelled, "We are doomed." The sun had just set, and Mr. Owl was about to snatch himself a Scamper burger. Right before he planted his talons, he saw a familiar face. It was his good friend, Mr. Fremore. Now, I have a little bit more to this story to end it, but I'm not going to read it to you because it's not important to you. You don't like this kind of stuff. Oh, but if you do, you can just get the book. The book is it's at Juba Bay 13 Creations. It's on BigCartel.com. I'll leave it in the information thing. And if you like little stories like this, or if you think this was a good read, you might want to check this book out. It's called The Book of Books. Open your eyes and read, genius.